Welcome back to For All the Saints with me, Paul Sutton, soon to be the church planter of All Saints Church in Exeter. And with me today, I have an extremely special guest who will be known personally by many of us listening to this. I've got Ruth Clarke, who is the Children's and Families Minister at St Leonard's in Exeter. Welcome, Ruth.
Thanks.
Ruth, we're here to talk about, I suppose, a kind of next step, but it's more of a little detour off the path we've been talking about with children, but a really important one. We're here to talk about godparents, how they fit in, whether they're a good thing, and then maybe some practical stuff on that at the end. So first of all, are you actually qualified to talk about this? Are you a godparent?
I am a godparent.
Good, me too. So we got two bona fide godparents on this. And I have to say, Ruth is actually the godmother of one of our children, and she's definitely a better godparent than I am. So Ruth, let's just talk about godparents, because we're Bible-believing Christians. Are godparents in the Bible?
No, technically not.
Okay, that's it. Well, thank you very much. No, go on.
But I think there are principles in the Bible that a godparent meets those things well.
Now, is that in a similar way to how we would say that infant baptism is not like right there in one verse, but it is in the Bible overall? Do you think it's in a similar bracket to that?
No, I think it's less than that, if that's the right way of putting it, but still a good thing that can meet some of the things that we are commanded to do in the Bible. Having godparents is a way of being able to achieve some of those things, I think.
Cool. Well, I'm with you on that, as we will see. Now, it's fair to say as well, just on the history of godparents, that godparents or sponsors are a pretty early thing in the church, almost at times like it was a kind of members club that you needed somebody to sort of sponsor you to join, and not necessarily in a good way. There are some funny stories in history about how, for example, King Alfred insisted that when he defeated this Viking king Guthrum, that he should be baptized and that Alfred should be his godfather to basically keep him in check and make sure he did all that kind of stuff. But rather than talking about the history of it, let's come into some of those sort of biblical principles you're talking about. So where do you think a clear place that we'd see those biblical principles is?
Well, I think one of the obvious places to go would be Mark 10. So let me read verses 29 to 31. I tell you the truth, Jesus replied. No one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age, homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children and fields, and with them persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. And I think that's a good example of the fact that within the church, there are things that we sacrifice as Christians, but that we also are called to be mothers, fathers, sisters to others as well.
Yeah, and it's quite explicit, isn't it, in verse 30, 100 times as much in this present age. And then it's like, let's just be clear about exactly what I mean by that. Home, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields. And I suppose you're saying it's not just even though it's a promise, we'll receive, it's not actually just a promise. There's something we have to do to make this happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we are, it doesn't just come to you and you sit and wait for it. You actively go out and be a mother, a brother, a sister to others.
Yeah, and I think, if you're going to have 100 homes, which is implying a kind of quite challenging, radical level of hospitality, somebody's got to be willing to offer you that.
Yeah, right.
That hospitality. And somebody's got to be willing to offer you that mothering, I suppose. So just spell out then, how do godparents fit into that?
Good question. Well, I think as godparents, you are helping the parents as they raise their children. So you are helping to be a mother or a father to those children, thinking about their, obviously the most important thing is them growing up to know and love Jesus. And so thinking about their spiritual good, praying for them and encouraging them in their walk with Jesus.
Mm. We were talking earlier on about, is this like a biblical command to have godparents or to be a godparent? We're saying no, it is a biblical requirement for all of us who are Christians to be in some way the fulfillment of this promise. But in reality, it's going to be particular people who share their homes with you. And I suppose the godparent thing is a sort of way that we've come up with to almost formalize that in a helpful way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's good. If you've been asked to be a godparent, you know that is something that the parents want you to be doing, which kind of almost gives you a bit more permission to be getting alongside those children and praying for them and helping them to learn and grow. And it helps you to be more disciplined in doing that as well, I think, because you've made promises and commitments on their behalf.
Absolutely. Let's talk about other biblical examples of this. So do we see any mothering and fathering of a non-biological way going on in the Bible?
Yeah, I think we do. So one of the examples we could look at is Paul talks about Rufus's mother as being a mother to me in Romans. And he also talks about it in both 1st and 2nd Corinthians a bit about people being like children to him. So I think there is quite a lot of that sort of language in the Bible.
And those two things, they're kind of potentially slightly different, if related, ideas. In that when it says Rufus's mother was a mother to me, can I just say, I've always found it hilarious that he evidently either doesn't know or doesn't want to reveal Rufus's mother's name. She's just known as Rufus's mother to him. You know, that's not saying it was by means of Rufus's mother that I became a Christian and she's my mother in the gospel in that sense, which I think is what Paul is saying about himself in 1 Corinthians. He's saying that you've got many teachers and stuff, but you haven't got many fathers because I was the one who brought you the gospel. I think when he says similarly in Philemon verse 10 about Onesimus, it's similarly saying Onesimus became my son because I shared the gospel with him. Yeah. But what are other examples that are more on the Rufus's mother scale of things? I
think with Timothy and Titus, especially, Timothy became a Christian through, is it his mum and his grandmother? So it's not, Paul wasn't necessarily the one that converted Timothy, and yet he calls him his child in the faith. So there's another example there of that sort of language.
Good. Well, we're shoring this up nicely. We not only have we got the big promise, but we've also got real examples of it. And again, I want to underline the fact that doesn't mean, therefore, one has to have godparents. It's like a biblical command that you not only have your children baptized, but do so with sponsors or godparents. But we're saying it's flowing out of biblical principles. It's actually not just a kind of weird tradition that it was Christians working out precisely what Jesus had taught them. Let's move on then to talk about the kind of practical tips on how to be a godparent, how to be a parent of children who have godparents, how to be a godchild, that sort of thing. Have you got any tips, first of all, on how to pick godparents?
Obviously, I've never had to pick godparents. I don't have my own children. So you might have more tips than I do on that. But I think obviously you want people who you think are going to help your children to mature in their faith. So they should have a mature faith themselves. It should be people that you want to be a part of your family, because the way that they can be most effective godparents is by knowing not only the child but your whole family well, so that they can get alongside you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to live in the same locality as you, but someone that you are confident that you're going to, God willing, continue seeing on a relatively regular basis for the rest of your child's life. So I think that's an important aspect too.
I was thinking about who came to my own wedding, and my wife's godparents from decades before were there. And okay, some of those would have had a very tight and close relationship with her over a long time. Some of them wouldn't, and perhaps there's some for the reasons you've said about location and stuff like that. Maybe there's something inevitable about that. But yeah, at least plausibly, you're saying, I want this person to, I guess, be able to have a realistic shot at keeping the pledges they've made. To, as far as I can tell, we're still going to be friends, and this person's still going to be a useful influence in the child's life.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I guess some people might feel, I'd feel awkward about, even though I'm really good friends with this single friend of mine, I don't want to ask them to be a godparent because they might feel a certain awkwardness about not being a parent themselves. Do you think that's a sensible concern or wrong?
I actually think there's a huge advantage to having single people as godparents, both for the single person and for the family. Single people obviously have a lot more time and flexibility. So you said earlier you felt like I was a better godparent than you. I'm sure that's not true, but I do have a lot more flexibility to be able to go and visit my godchildren who don't live locally in a way that you don't, because you've got your own children and family. I have more time, even with my local godchildren, to be able to spend the time with them and spend time with the family and get to know them well. I don't have the same restraints. And for me personally, I don't have my own children. And so it is such a joy and privilege to be able to really get to know my godchildren and their families and be a part of their lives. And, in the way that it says in Mark, to gain those children, those families for myself as well. That's really important to me.
And it's part of the blessings of being a Christian is being placed into this family. And that's true both in terms of having older father and mother figures in your own life, brothers and sisters who are, I guess, includes everyone, but particularly peers of yours. But I suppose especially for people who end up not getting married, this manifests what the promise that's given to them, that actually they may have given up, in a sense, children, as it says in Mark chapter 10, and yet they receive 100 times as much at this present age, including children.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm right to be sort of sensitive about it, or am I just being oversensitive about that?
I don't know. I mean, obviously I can only speak for myself, but I have felt really honoured with the people that have asked me to be a godparent, and it really has helped and encouraged me as I've got to know their family. And yeah, it has been a huge blessing. And so I would be very sad if someone was thinking of asking a single person and thought, oh no, I better not because it might be sensitive. I think it's quite the opposite. It's a real privilege and joy to be asked as a single person. And not every single person might feel the same, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I think it presents a challenge both to married couples and to single people in the church, that actually if you're not putting yourself out there in terms of hospitality and friendship in such a way that you actually do have close enough friendships across the marriage singleness divide that you might plausibly say this person would be a great godparent, or I would love to be a godparent. It encourages us to have better relationships across those, which is mutually beneficial all around in all kinds of other ways as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that married people would make bad godparents. I think it's great to have married people as godparents too, but yeah. No biblical commands on any of this. So we're literally just making it up. Okay, let's just quickly talk about the practical tips on being a godparent. We were talking about this earlier in the week, and somebody said something about brushing your teeth. Yeah, so someone, I don't even know who it was now, but someone advised me when I got my first godchild that the best way to make sure you pray for them every day is to pray for them while you're brushing your teeth. So that's what I do. I pray for my godchildren while I'm brushing my teeth each day.
Or like one quadrant per...
Yeah, well, I've got 6 at the moment, so, space for 2 more.
As otherwise, you've got a maximum of 32, unless you've had your wisdom teeth removed. Sorry, I can no longer deal with it.
Yeah, I'll have to come up with another plan if I get too many more.
Okay, besides that, what about other tips on being a godparent?
I think spending as much time with them and the family as you can to get to know them. Obviously, praying for them each day is a huge thing. But the better you know them, the better you know how you can be praying for them. And asking the parents, especially when the children are younger, asking the parents what are genuinely helpful daily things that you can be praying for them. And building up, especially if you're local to your godchildren, building up a relationship with them so that they, as they get older, feel able to talk to you about things they're concerned about. One of the things I try and do is write each year on the anniversary of their baptism, write to them. And again, someone gave me that tip and said, start it from when they're really young, because then it'll never seem weird to them. Whereas if you suddenly start writing them a letter when they're 13 saying, hey, it's the 12th anniversary of your baptism, then they might be like, why are you suddenly doing this? And particularly if you've got godchildren, some of you may have godchildren from families that are not necessarily professing, and that's quite a good way of being able to keep sharing the gospel with them as well.
Yeah. I'm going to give the other side of it as somebody who is not as organised and diligent and I suppose fundamentally loving in that respect as Ruth is, which is that I think a lot of people feel a great deal of guilt about their failures as a godparent, and to some extent that's right. We've made a true commitment, and the way that we're not following through on it is something that we should be saying, well, how did I do that? Having said that, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it too much. And like my discipline of praying for our godchildren is less diligent than that. We're there with our little cards that we pray for with various people around the breakfast table, and our godchildren are on that because we want to make sure that we are praying for and keeping in touch with. And similarly with presents and Christmas and birthdays and stuff, I think that's a totally sensible thing to do. But I've always said to all of the people we've asked to be godparents to our children, please don't make this a burden that you just feel guilty about. Like, the thing that I covet from you more than sweet presents is your continuing friendship with us, with our child. And
I think that's a helpful point. You and Jenny did talk to me when you asked me to be a godparent about what your expectations were, if you like, from that. And I think that is an important conversation to have if someone asks you to be a godparent, or if you are asking someone to be a godparent, just setting out, this is what I mean by that, this is what I'm expecting from that, so that you both know together what the other is expecting. Yeah.
And I think coming back to our original question about is this biblical, making pledges and promises, which you're not required to do by the Bible, is a legitimate thing to do. And we ought to take those promises and pledges seriously and follow through on them. But therefore, you need to sort of understand what it is you're promising to do. And that's why I want to set the bar really low, precisely out of a sense of the weightiness and seriousness of it. Okay, lastly, how do you think godchildren can do a good job of being a godchild?
Great question. My godchildren are all still relatively young at the moment. My oldest goddaughter is 11. And so I guess a lot of it so far has been down to the parents more than the children. But just being willing to get to know each other. So obviously, you know, I can try and get to know my godchildren, but they need to be willing for me to get to know them and to get to know me as well. So I guess that's a start. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
We not only have our godchildren on our list of things that we pray together, our sort of cards that we pray for people over the breakfast table, but we also have our children's godparents. So we want them to understand that, you know, these people pray for you, and we're also praying for them. We have a kind of concern for them. I mean, we're not very good at this, but we try and get the children to remember and do something to recognize their godparents' birthdays. Again, just a bit like what you were saying about how if you write on the baptism day when they're 2, the relationship is sort of building around that purpose so that it's real when they're 13. And I suppose what we're trying to do in praying for the godparents and sending a birthday message to godparents is again trying to build that mutuality of sense of this is somebody who is part of your life, and that's easier when you see them more often and all the rest of it. But it's just different. It's not impossible when they're further away.
Yeah, and actually, so my first goddaughter, for the first few years of her life, lived in another country, and her family were really good at. They had photos of the godparents and regularly spoke to the children about them. So that then when they came back to this country, you didn't have that kind of awkward, oh, I don't really know you, but I should know you thing. They felt like they knew me, and that was really nice because it kind of. You weren't a few steps back in the relationship, it started in a much stronger place. And so, yeah, I found that really helpful that they'd obviously put in the work on their side to kind of make the children feel like they knew us as well, which was great.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Ruth. And any final words on godparenting while we're talking about it?
No.
Well, let me close out this episode then with a quote from C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, about spiritual motherhood. So cue the spooky music for the background of this. This is a glorious lady has appeared in this vision of heaven and hell that the writer has had. Only partly do I remember the unbearable beauty of her face. Is it? I whispered to my guide. Not at all, said he, but someone you'll never have heard of. Her name on earth was Sarah Smith, and she lived at Golders Green. She seems to be, well, a person of particular importance. Aye, she's one of the great ones. You've heard that fame in this country and fame on earth are two quite different things. And who are these gigantic people? Look, they're like emeralds who are dancing and throwing flowers before her. And who are all these young men and women on each side? They are her sons and daughters. She must have had a very large family, sir. Every young man or boy that met her became her son, even if it was only the boy that brought the meat to her back door. Every girl that met her was her daughter. Isn't that a bit hard on their own parents? No. There are those that steal other people's children, but her motherhood was of a different kind. Those on whom it fell went back to their natural parents, loving them more.